Sasha, did you want, oh, wait a minute. How does this work, Edwin? Am I supposed to go next or
Yeah, you go next. You can speak to either me or Sasha.
Okay, I will speak to Sasha. So we don't leave you out, Sasha.
No.
I have to put this on my screen because I highlighted some things that I wanted to highlight this concept of relational empathy, I think it appeals to me because my discipline is not psychology and my discipline is communication. And, you know, Broome comes from that discipline, even though this is not a very well-known piece in the discipline.
You favor this Broome's approach to empathy because your discipline is not psychology, and you feel more at home where Broome is coming from communication.
Right. Because communication, especially people who are social constructivists, we see communication as happening in the between, that we're building something new. It's not, I have this perfectly formed idea and it has to get to your head. That's a very old model of communication, in fact. It was one of the first ones, and it was meant for computer communication or telephone communication. But yeah, it's this idea that we construct together.
So you see yourself as a social constructivist, and so you and your colleague and like-minded people view communication as happening between sender and receiver, and not just as a transmittance of information from sender to receiver as seen by computer programmers in the early days of the telephone.
Right, exactly. And there was another concept here that I really liked. Where was it? I have to find it until of course, all of it is around, for me, this idea of building and integrating and coming up with, as he said, the third culture, that there's something in between us, that something more happens with empathy than just simply understanding. We build something new. So there it is, productive rather than reproductive. That's what I liked.
Could you repeat that? I didn't get that.
Productive rather than reproductive.
Okay.
So you're producing, yeah.
So you understood from Broome's article that he talks about a third culture that happens in between. It's not culture A and culture B, but a third culture happens. And this culture is productive rather than reproductive. And that appeals very much to you.
Very much, very much. Now, the only complaint I have about Broome's article is then he just drops us off with no hows. Yeah, it's like, yes, I'm with you. Now, how do we do this? And he's like, well, I'm not going to talk about that.
So I can see you're a bit disappointed with Broome because he gets everybody excited, but then doesn't really offer a how to do at the end.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Well, thank you. I feel heard on that.
Thank you. Maybe Edwin, if you would like to repeat, it will be a short. I do feel a bit like in school. I excelled at improvising when I haven't done my homework, and I was a straight A student when I finished high school. So I didn't do too bad with that, but.
So you feel like you're in school when you didn't do your homework, but you were able to improvise and get good grades anyway.
Well, guys, I'm really sorry. I didn't really think when I saw your message today. I didn't really think a lot and just checked in. And I didn't realize that we wanted to do the reading of the article. I'm really sorry for not being as prepared as I should be.
Okay, you're feeling sorry that you're not as prepared as you should be.
Yeah, I spent a frantic afternoon finishing some brochures which I have to deliver tomorrow and writing bills, and which I didn't have the time last week. So please bear with me.
So you're feeling fairly frantic today, doing different, writing bills and other things, and asking us
Yeah.
to bear with you.
Yes, yes. Nevertheless, as I do, well, empathy and intercultural communication is really something which I have been talking about in my trainings for years now. So it's not a subject that is totally foreign to me. And what I gleaned from Dorothy's and your information, I think that really is a valid point to talk about a third culture that is generated when people from different cultures are communicating. And I do have a lot of experience with that by myself and from what other people have told me who have been in communication between different cultures. And actually the only way that you get functioning communication, and I totally agree with Dorothy on that, is that you need to have a third culture. Otherwise, I mean, it's good for my business that intercultural communication most often collapses and people simply do not understand each other. But then it is my job to actually facilitate some sort of understanding. And that third culture is a very interesting concept.
So what I'm hearing is you deal actually on this topic of intercultural relating, and that you've been working in this area, and that you see that the intercultural relating kind of can fall apart, and that's actually beneficial to you in the sense that you are able to go in there and kind of address this. So
Yeah, that's why I'm funding Trump's campaign, because he's good for my business.
So yeah, this is maybe feeling a little humorous here that you're supporting Trump, actually funding him, because this lack of intercultural understanding helps your business. Like,
and well, you know, interestingly enough, you can see these tendencies when people start. I think when we talk about empathy and intercultural communication, a big part is what I've seen is dehumanization. That actually people tend to dehumanize, especially in intercultural virtual teams. They start to dehumanize the other party, mostly in the Philippines and in India. You know, these guys and girls in the offshore centers. They just see them as human resources, so they dehumanize them, so they don't have to empathize with them. And now, if you dehumanize Indians and Filipinos, who are an extremely personalistic society, who like to be, who spend a lot of time socializing and empathizing with each other, and then the work actually doesn't flow very nicely. And so in the intercultural trainings, I try to give people an insight that only with empathy, and which I see as kind of an antidote against dehumanization. Only with that antidote can you actually establish a working relationship, which and a third culture.
So in your work, you're saying that it sounds like maybe people that you're working with, they dehumanize, like Indians or Filipinos, for example, and that empathy is the solution. What you're in your training, you're trying to show that actually empathy is a way to not dehumanize or to overcome that dehumanization, and that you see that as important.
Yes, yes, yes. Because only if you have the understanding that the other person is a human too, then and actually not that different from you, only then you can start to empathize, and only then communication can actually start to happen on a well on a human level. You know, that kind of communication that Dorothy described, where this kind of computer communication, actually that does happen quite a lot between programmers and between data analysts, and that they tend to communicate in such a way, but that only works until you know, some broader issues come along, like how do we divide the work, how do we organize work, and then how do we cooperate, and how do we praise and give feedback and stuff like that, you know.
So you need the empathy for kind of cooperative work or kind of effective work. Is that, I think, is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay.
I feel fully heard.
Okay. Yeah, then I guess I'll speak to Dorothy. Yeah, the dehumanization, I think, is that fight, flight, or freeze. You know, it's kind of like the fight, it's the put down. And it's the same thing with politics that I see, that it actually goes both ways. I think that, you know, the Democrats are not empathizing with Republicans as well as Republicans. So I really see it going both ways. I don't see Hillary Clinton as a model of empathy, you know, when she talks, and you and I have talked about that, when she says the deplorables and, you know, the Republicans are my enemy and all that kind of stuff, that I don't see that as a real empathic, you know, approach either. So.
Okay. So what you're talking about now, Edwin, is this idea of carrying these ideas into the political realm and building on Sasha's ideas about dehumanization, and saying that, you know, our political discourse right now is not characterized by empathy, not by either party. The lack of empathy goes both ways.
And on the one website there, I've got a list of 30 blocks to empathy. You know, so I keep laying out the different blocks that I come across. So that could actually be a whole, I could imagine those being a separate lesson, each of those, you know, that we go into each of those blocks. And I've seen that in the NVC community, where they'll actually have exercises where you practice, you know, somebody telling a story, and then someone dehumanizes you, for example, says, "Oh, you're stupid, you're an idiot, you're like a, you know, cockroach or something." So you get to feel what it's like to get that directed at you, and then, you know, you kind of have a dialogue and you share, well, what did that feel like? And then you maybe have like an empathic approach. There's like exercises around each of these blocks to empathy that I could see. It would be nice to have like a training, an online training, where you could go through all those different blocks.
Okay. So the list you've compiled of blocks to empathy, you have about 30 items on that list, and you could see a training built around that, around understanding what the blocks, the barriers to empathy are.
Yeah, so you could really experience the blocks, you know, getting those judgments thrown at you so you can feel what it's like, and then also feel what it's like to get empathy instead. So you say something, and then people all criticize you. You can feel the criticism, and then you go around and you get empathized with what you said, and you can feel what it's like to have that empathy and compare the two different experiences.
Okay, so what you envision in the training is you get to sit in the experience of either a barrier to empathy, like being criticized, or feeling empathy, so that it becomes a felt experience each way.
Yeah, and that, anyway, the empathy, that's again where I get back to integration, that what we're doing here with empathic listening is a way of slowing down the conversation, one, everyone gets to speak until they feel heard, so you don't have those interruptions. So this is just like one tool for facilitating that integration versus, it keeps it from turning into as much of a conflict, right? It's toning it down. So those are just some of the hows which you were mentioning that, he didn't talk about. So this is just one of the tools, the empathic listening, and one of the most powerful ones that I've come across.
Okay, and what you're saying here is that empathic listening is one of the tools that's maybe missing from the Broome article, as I was complaining, where it slows down the communication and helps people, deal with each other empathically.
And fosters that integration too.
And it addresses brings about the integration. Okay.
And what he's doing is sort of giving maybe a contextual framework.
Yeah.
For, how do you kind of have a map where you don't place yourself at the center, but you kind of see yourself in a relationship, and how do you hold that, create that map somehow in your. So I think that's his kind of offering. Okay.
So the main offering you see coming from Broome is he gives you a conceptual map to relational empathy, kind of telling you how to hold yourself in the between instead of, just in your solo self.
Yeah, and some of the contributions from therapy, for example, the psychology, is there may be like individual components within that larger map. So there is something about, bringing your empathy forward to listen to someone who's in great need, and great distress, from sort of a psychology, but that kind of fits within the larger map, that's just like one component of the larger relationship view.
Okay, so what psychology and the therapeutic aspects of empathy, which Broome had pointed out in his article, what you see those contributing they're components of this whole process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel heard. Thanks.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think where I'm left with Broome is I agree. I'm talking to Sasha. I agree with Edwin that Broome seems to give us a map for relational empathy, for kind of expressing what it is and what it's not. And then we have to go that next step. All he talks about is, talks a little about listening, if I recall right, and he talks about feedback. So I think the next task is to explore those. And I actually started looking now for what's called interpretive listening. He seems tied to the literature. I went and checked his bibliography, and he's tied to the literature on interpretive empathy. So now I'm like, okay, what's that? I need to look that up.
So you agree with Edwin that Broome has only given a map for relational empathy. He hints a bit at empathic listening and some empathic feedback methods, but you yourself tracked down his influences, and you came across interpretive listening, interpretive empathy.
Yes, and I got to my library today and tried to get some of the articles. I was able to get one. They're old articles, because of course his article's old, about interpretive empathy. And then I found the Journal of Listening, the International Journal of Listening. Oh. That had a lot of stuff about empathy.
Okay, you found an esoteric journal called International Journal of Listening, which surprisingly had a lot of articles on listening in your local library. Yeah.
Yes. And then another thread that seems to come up in Broome's work, and when you trace back his influences, as you said it, is dialogue. And I often end up back in dialogue work, because dialogue comes from a relational standpoint. So now I'm like, okay, I have homework, interpretive listening and dialogue.
And you see another thread coming from Broome is a dialogue, and that seems to give you a lot of homework because now you have to read on dialogue, and which is also a specialty of yours, dialogue in a way, as it
Yeah.
is relational and yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That was all I needed
Welcome.
to say. Thank you.
So you probably have to read Martin Buber and Gadamer.
Yes. The I and the thou.
Yes,
I'm
I started
actually
to read
ashamed
Martin.
to say that I haven't read it yet.
Well, I have it. I have it in my shelf, but I have to admit that I haven't had. Well, I got to the first chapter of Martin Buber, and it's very exceptional. And he.
So it just sounds like you're speaking back to Dorothy. So I just wanted to be sure that we have that. Okay.
Yeah. So Edwin.
No, it's fine. If you want to continue, I just wanted to be clear who you were speaking to.
Okay. Okay, Dorothy. So I'm talking to you again, answering you in a way. Yeah, I because I have been browsing through the article, and I see that he has mentioned a lot of people like Gadamer, which is a very well-known German philosopher. People have ever read him, and so and also then when you mentioned dialogue, I had to remember Martin Buber, because he is in a way he is the well, he is in a way he is the founding father of dialogue, and
Yes.
of dialogue and empathy in a way. And I found his his writings highly fascinating, but very that you know. I mean, he came up with the theories on the philosophy of dialogue, the philosophy of communication in a way, because many as you have I have also noticed that many people have a very mechanistic view on communication. I think that well, computers have actually started to spoil people quite a lot, and they think that communication is like we are all using the same protocol like HTML, and I'm saying, or XML or whatever, and I'm sending to you, and you just have to decipher what I've said, and that's communication, right?
Right. Do you, would you like me to reflect that back to you?
Yeah, yes, sure.
So what the Broome article generated for you was you saw some of his foundational works that he talked about, like Gadamer and Buber, and
Yes.
that took you to Buber, and how much he laid the groundwork as a philosophy of communication, a philosophy of dialogue,
Yes.
which would be related to the work we're talking about. And
Yeah.
instead of the mechanistic view of, the sender receiver model of communication.
Yeah, definitely. And Martin Buber, I mean, what I found, what I read about, he calls it I and you, and he has kind of I'd say he believes in the mystique of communication, that whenever an I and an you communicate, there is something happening in between,
Yes.
and the magic of the in between, and that is something that he is very well, has obviously been very fascinated with, and it is something that we can notice as something very fascinating, that that the magic of well, the magic of empathy, that it creates something new.
Right. And so what you're saying is Buber takes you to that idea of the magic of the in-between, and then the idea of empathy as creating something new, which sounds like it's entirely consistent with how you read Broome as being this third culture.
Yes, yes, and Buber actually talks about the seductive the seductive charm of getting into that kind of in between world.
Okay, Buber uses the language of getting to the between as having a seductive charm. Okay.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Huh. Good. I got to read Buber.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean he's one of the few people who actually came from that plot of land. I mean, of course, he is of Jewish descendant, but he experiences so much and yet stayed so human and so alive, and that's completely fascinating. Yeah. Thank you.
nice. Okay. Okay. What do people want to do now?
You're up.
I'm up.
Yeah, you can choose if you want it. If we're doing the empathic listening, we just continue for the allotted time. Unless you have something else you're wanting to do.
No, I can't think of anything else that I'd want to add to the conversation we've had, other than, you know, we've clarified some things and pointed out areas where we need to read more.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Who are
got
you speaking to? Or do you want to just open it up, or kind of what's?
Yeah, I'd rather open it up. I'm feeling kind
Okay.
of stilted in the conversation. And I have to say, this happens to me in empathy circles, and I know it's not everybody's experience, but I start to feel like I want to engage, and it's not a full engagement for me.
Okay, so sure, we can try different things. The for the empathy circle, for me, or the empathic listening, is sort of like a practice that is to actually kind of explore what is that quality that's happening. Like if you're not feeling engaged, like why does that engage? Why don't you feel engaged? Or, you know, what does that mean? Or, you know, so that's one thing to look at. I like the empathic listening as like a practice, because it just kind of keeps you kind of going into it. And I've found that, like, especially like for mediation and conflict resolution, it kind of builds a resilience for stepping into like conflict, you know, and being able to maintain like an empathic presence. Because what happens, like in a conflict, like people start going at each other, and they kind of get triggered, and it's easy to get that triggered, you know, where you kind of want to engage, and then you start kind of fighting back, which heightens the fight with the other person. I mean, you've done mediation, right? You're a mediator, so you know it, you know, what I'm talking about. So anyway, that's what I like about the empathic listening, is that it you know, you're sort of practicing that presence of really listening. And so anyway, that's
yeah, I feel like empathic listening is one useful strategy for communicating, but now, especially after, you know, the Broome article, I have to question, how does it help us get to the between? How does it help us construct something from both sides that is a new thing, this third culture? I think it helps somewhat, but in some ways it keeps you from throwing in new ideas, asking questions, talking about other resources, bringing in, oh, wow, Sasha said this and it connected to that for me, but I can't say that because I'm just active listening. And that's where I'm like, in a conversation, I want more. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with that. That sometimes, you know, it's good to get things started, because it puts you on the spot of listening very actively, of tuning into the other person. But once the ball is rolling, then I had to look up what stilted mean, and that word wasn't in my vocabulary yet. But I can see it. At a certain point, I guess it becomes stilted for me too. Because when you have the strong feeling, oh, okay, now I have to chip in and let, there's sometimes in a conversation there are sparks being sent out, and and you could offer some tinder by contributing something, and then you have a nice fire going on which warms everybody. And so just withholding comments because you're not allowed to, just I think sometimes stops the conversation when actually everybody is in that kind of peaceful mood and everybody wants to share, and also I think it's hard to imagine that empathic listening will create a lot of laughter in a group because everybody's so was listening. That being said, I'm not questioning the utility of empathic listening. I have just taught it to my participants, and I as you said, Edwin, it's very good for conflict situations. And but then again, the question is, how can we practice empathic listening in a cold state, so to speak, in a cold emotional state? And wouldn't it be better to practice empathic listening by actually getting into a hot emotional state, like role playing? Like I would be playing a Trump supporter and you play a Hillary Clinton supporter, and then stuff like that. I mean, I had my participants do that. Some were playing the customers, and the others were playing the clerks in the shop, and then they had mock fights going on. So they actually got into quite hot emotional states doing that.
Mm-hmm. Did they use empathic listening between each other when they were in those hot states, or did they just role play?
That's what I went around and told everybody. Keep paraphrasing, keep empathic listening, keep mirroring. Not just do your usual routine. Do all that what we are here to train.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's different I guess methods. Or one is the empathic listening. Another is role playing. Like what is sort of a curriculum of activities that build,
Right.
No. I'm not saying a different method. I'm saying to use role playing to get people into hot emotional states, and then do the empathic listening while being heated up. So you have the situation where people use empathic listening to actually for mediation, to get into cold emotional states again, right?
Mm-hmm. So somehow we need to get us riled up with each other to what can we do to get pissed off at each other?
Well, it does raise the question, based on both what I heard Edwin say and Sasha, what I heard you say, that empathic listening sounds like it is very necessary and very fundamental when people are in conflict states, or as you said, a hot emotional state. Is it as fundamental when people are not? That's a good question. That's a research question.
I think there's kind of like two parts to that. One is, maybe we're here, we're all already have internalized like an empathic listening approach where we kind of listen to each other, kind of give space. But there's so many of these blocks to empathy that people aren't even aware that they don't give that space. Like in one circle, I remember there was someone who had that sense of, I have an idea. I want to be able to throw it out there when I have the idea, because if I don't, I'll sort of lose it. So they have this thing about always wanting to jump in with their idea because they they feel it's so important. But by doing the empathic listening for, you know, like 2 or 3 hours and doing it over multiple, you know, days, they said, wow, I really learned that I don't have to throw my idea out there because it actually starts emerging from the group anyway. So because one problem that happens is when people feel that they have to throw their idea out, that then it can start becoming a competition. Like, well, I got to get my idea out there. And how do we get from, you know, it depends on the group, right? The group can be very sensitive and that doesn't happen. But there's so many blocks to empathy that are so subtle that, you know, it's like continuously doing it, we start finding what those blocks are is one thing. So I don't know if that's making sense, but
yeah.
And I'm you know, what are other ways? Like what are like actual steps or processes that we can use in a curriculum, you know, for this? So, you know, kind of going into systematically going through the 30 blocks to empathy, you know, is a lesson. You know, that's that can be something too, because
right. Now, I think that's a good question. Is, you know, what is, I mean, it kind of takes us back to what brought us all together in the first place. What is essential in an empathy curriculum? What is empathy training about? And yeah, I see empathic listening as a fundamental skill that, or you know, something that has to be learned and practiced. But I don't see it as an entire curriculum. So I think that's a good question for the work we're all thinking about, which is what else would be? Like when Broome talks about feedback, what does he mean? What is feedback that creates that third place? Yeah.
Well, a big part is, for me, is the feeling component. I'm really kind of getting back to empathy as a feeling into. You know, feeling into self and feeling into others. And there's like processes like focusing. I don't know how much you know about those, but that's where you actually feel into an experience that you have and you just really stay with it, the felt experience, you keep sharing it. And then you do get a reflection on it, but then you kind of go deeper into that feeling. So you can spend like a whole hour feeling into a sort of a surface feeling, and it just keeps kind of unraveling and transforming and kind of opens up like an energy field kind of comes out of it. It's like the next, you kind of come to these blocks, internal blocks, and then you kind of feel this sense of energy come out from those blocks. So that's like a really fixed kind of a process or tool. There's the NVC process, which is you find a feeling like a frustration, then you try to see what is the feeling that people are desiring. So for example, I was hearing a feeling a bit of frustration. I don't know what the word was. So there's a feeling of frustration. What was the word you used for the empathic listening feeling? Stilted. So there's an underlying need that you have right behind that stiltedness and a desire for a different kind of a feeling. So you try to identify what is that feeling that you're desiring, and then you can kind of make a request, you know, using that process of how to get to that underlying need, which I just see as another feeling. So these are I'm just kind of looking at, you know, how are people kind of approaching this empathy, you know, how they kind of, kind of going into this.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think there's going to be many, many ways, even based on the literature that you have on the website, as much of it as I've read. You know, there seems to be many, many ways. And maybe that's what a curriculum needs, is maybe the people who don't respond so well to empathic listening over time would learn more from another process.
Yeah.
You know, everybody has a different thing or a different way they would learn.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of address, have like a set of processes that address where people are, where.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, it's really difficult to construct a curriculum that suits everybody in a way. That will be kind of hard. And I mean, the good thing about communication seminars and as a whole, when you see like empathic seminars as a subcategory of communication seminars, then the good thing about that, you can always experience what actually is on the curriculum. You have other seminars, it's very difficult, so you have always the immediate experience of empathy that you can have in these seminars. And I think a curriculum should, first of all, concentrate on the immediate experience of the empathic feeling, for example, that I had a very nice experience in my seminar. I was going around from group to group, and in one group it was kind of slow. So I was playing a customer that was enraged, and I'm kind of getting into this impromptu acting. There was somebody was standing in a McDonald's restaurant, and there was a Persian employee, and Persians have a way of showing things with that finger,
Uh-huh.
When they're showing, they don't use the index finger like we Western Europeans do. They use that kind of finger. So she was showing in Berlin something on the board, was explaining something on the menu, and then a German of German origins came in the restaurant, and she just saw her doing that obscene gesture. And so I was supposed to play that guy barging into the restaurant and demanding, I want to speak with the restaurant manager. She just showed me the fuck finger. Why did she do that? I'm so upset. Why did she? I haven't done anything to her. And I really worked myself up into that role. And my participant, she was a sweet young lady. And the first run was terrible. I totally intimidated her, and she didn't get a word out. Then we had a second run, and she used empathic listening, and she really calmed me down within a few seconds. And I could see I was in a hot emotional state, and I experienced how she actually calmed me down from my fake rage in a way. It's very, very interesting to actually experience that for yourself. Usually I'm not getting that worked up in public, and it was a kind of a new experience for me as well. I was raised that shouting in public is impolite and you don't do it. So playing that guy who was enraged by the Persian employee was really also an interesting experience. So.
Well, how was that whole workshop go? Like, what was the kind of curriculum you used for that?
Well, I focused on mirroring and empathic listening, actually.
Okay.
That was basically the workshop, and I talked about empathy and how to, well, actually, I called it empathic complaint management. That was because it was about complaints. They wanted to have complaints being managed in the store, and not so that the McDonald's, the corporate McDonald's doesn't get any, they're not being informed. So with empathy, they were supposed to calm down the customers so that they, the guests, so that they are satisfied in the store. And I offered them empathic listening, and it was very successful in a way.
Excellent.
Well, one thing they can do too is have, when people are like in a group like that where they're doing empathic listening for the customers, is that they have their own empathy circles for each other to kind of to de-stress too. Do you know what I mean?
Sure, I did suggest something like that.
Okay.
But but they're in such an incredible hurry.
Mhm.
They under so much stress. It's hard for them to do that. But they said it's nice, and they will also use it. The managers will use it on the employees,
Mhm.
and to actually form a support culture of empathy in a way.
Mhm. Yeah.
Nice.
And actually, it felt very good doing doing the training, because first I thought, I have to work for this, stupid restaurants that sell tons of cow meat, which I do not really like. The fact that they sell cow meat, but it felt really good because I felt I was doing something for these poor, not poor, but for these underpaid and underprivileged people who have to, slave away at McDonald's for 8 to 10 hour shifts, earning minimum wage and getting no tips. So it felt really good to offer them something which can actually make their lives better.
Yeah, you could probably really see a benefit in terms of stress, that they're going to be feeling less stressed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the good thing is I found 2 papers done here at the Charité, which is one of the oldest hospitals in Europe, and they have done, which is located here in Berlin. That is where Virchow was discovering his groundworks on viral infections. And they have done some exceptional papers on empathic listening. So
Love to
I'm
see
very super.
those.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they're in English. I can send them to you. So
Yeah.
they were doing some research how empathic listening is actually soothing, bringing stress down. And they were doing some. I mean, people have been knowing that for ages, but you know how many psychologists are. You have to hook up people to machines and measure their heart rate and skin conductance and stuff like that, and it actually works like that.
Yeah.
It's not real until you measure it.
Well, in a way, I mean, there's so many frauds out there who promise you the world. So it's always nice to have some reproducible, stuff as well. I mean, I'm not against that.
Right. Right.
Well, what I'm looking at too is like, can we form like these empathy teams of what we're doing here, where we use and develop. I talked to Kathy McGuire, who's out of the focusing community, and she had started 40 years ago doing what she called changes groups. And she was a student under Gene Genlin and, in Chicago,
Sure.
University of Chicago with Carl Rogers. And it was basically using empathic listening in these, small groups for sort of mutual support. But could we form, I'm thinking like teams to be doing, doing what we're doing here, but then also to create like curriculum, and have it be reproducible, so that we're kind of looking at outward looking. So you're out there teaching, this, and what is your experience? So you have a place to come back like you're doing now and share your experience. So you get kind of like support for going out and teaching empathy, as well as maybe trying it in your family, because I do it with my partner Joan, as well as support my extended family, and my brother and sister-in-law. They're doing empathic listening with each other, and I'm trying to support them and their family. And it's just kind of the struggles of doing that, and how do we create training material for that, to support that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like the thing I'm thinking of, how to create, for kind of effective methods going forward.
So it would be like a collaborative method of bringing together trainers who are doing the work to talk about what they've done and how they're doing it and what kind of responses they're getting, and then compile that into a curriculum. Is that what you're talking about?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And then we also do it, together. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what's the struggle? Like, I know that when I tried to bring it into my family initially, it was so hard.
Yeah.
It's like there's this feeling of there's a structure in the family, and to bring something new like this, it was like there was just such, you know, this is too strange. There was just this huge resistance to it, you know, and I felt like really awkward, kind of even offering, you know, this empathic listening, even though I would do it subtly, you know, just kind of do it for with the different family members at kind of a subtle level, which was really helpful. They, you know, but you know, and it wasn't until there was this conflict, which I've mentioned before, there was like a full-blown explosive conflict, and I was able to bring empathic listening into it, bring all the party members together to, you know, where it ended in hugs all around. And then I gave it the name empathy, and then suddenly it's like it opened the door for the family to be accepting of it, and it led to one after the other of, you know, family mediations. It led to empathy circles, to, you know, on an ongoing way. So it was that experience that opened it. But getting to that point was like really hard. And I just wonder, are there things that we could do that we actually do empathic listening with our families, and then you try it with, you know, I mean, Sasha, you've mentioned you're having some conflict with your wife or some stress, you know, like, can you do empathy circles in your family, and what's the blocks to it, and what's the support, or, you know, something like that,
Yeah. I have to say that it's my duty tonight to bring my little daughter to bed, to put her to sleep, and I will have to check out now. But yeah, well, for marriage counseling, you have to I mean, it's like a process of self-healing, I think, with empathy circle, which is sometimes kind of hard when things are heated. But in theory, I do agree with you. In practical, we haven't succeeded yet of introducing that.
Yeah, and that's how do you make that happen? Like, there's, you know, it can be like support material, some kind of videos or something. You know, it's like
right.
There's a whole school around this called Imago Relationships, where they've actually kind of done this and put together. So like even having a training video or something that's engaging that people can see, that they say, oh, this is how it goes, and then it kind of, you know, opens the door to it in the family. So all that stuff can be developed. I guess at least I'm always optimistic about it.
Yeah.
You're right.
Oh, so do you want to do the next lesson? We're just, everybody's taking on actually, Melissa was taking the next one, so I think of it.
I thought Sasha was the next one.
Oh, Sasha's the next one? It was on the list with Sasha.
Okay. Let me get back to you by email, okay? Because I really have to sign off now, because my wife wants to leave and she can't if I'm still here on the phone.
Alrighty.
Okay.
All right. Take care, Sasha. Bye.
See you.
Well, it was really nice talking to you. Thank you.
Nice connecting. Yeah. Excellent.
Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.
Okay.
Okay. So just want to bring it to a close, or?
Yep. I think we're ready to close.
All right.
That was a good discussion.
Okay.
And I guess we'll just